Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I will have a painting tutorial for you for the Misty Grove. So if you would like, go ahead and go to the very beginning of this video and pause it so you can see my blank sketch, so you can get your rough sketch down. I just have a basis of some trees, foliage, and the deer. So basically, the starting process to this is just blocking in colors. As you can see in my background, I did a very light layer of blue-gray and green-gray. Now the blue-gray is going to be closer to the ground and the green-gray to the top because the tree line and the fog line. And from that background, I'm going to build forward into my foliage. So I'm going to use various greens, blues, and you'll notice what I'm doing with one bush is isolating it with a little bit more of a yellow-green tint. That is going to be the focal point of the piece, whereas our deer is going to be our subject. And it's the same concept here when we're blocking in the trees. We're not going to just use brown, we're going to use variations of greens and blues and browns to get those other surrounding colors of the background reflecting into the wood. Also, there will be moss on these trees, as you can see from the thumbnail. We want to get those green hues in there right away. And for the path, I'm just using various browns and greens to get that mossy, dirt, earthy texture just starting to get built up. Now, coming back to the very back, if that makes sense, because we work back to front, that's going to dry by the time you're done with your front layer, so you can hop back to your back layer. And that's when we start to go in with different blues, different greens, very light, and as we come forward it gets darker. The closer something is to us, the darker it's going to be. So I'm filling in the leaves basically from the trees, and I'm going to start with blue grays, soft greens, nothing too harsh, and as I come forward they're going to get darker. I'm just blotting in patches with my paintbrush. I'm not doing anything fancy, almost no detail whatsoever. I'm not thinking about it, I'm just tapping it in, and as I get closer it gets darker. Of course I do a few washes here and there to get a few more hints of whatever color I would like, whether that's blue or green, and then I'm going to do the exact same process with my bushes and also my trees. Really just building saturation and contrast right now. Not worried about any detail, just getting those main colors in, and also where our light source is. Also, about at this point you can do some fun splats. I love splats. You will see how much I use them to build detail, so that way we're not individually drawing any leaves. We're actually making the process easier, and all you need to do for that is just take your paint, a little bit of water, not too much though, and you can use gouache or just watercolor, and tap that baby across. And I usually work dark to light, depending on the area. If I'm just trying to build a bush, I'll start with my darkest greens, then maybe two different middle tones of green, like a medium dark green and then a light green, and then I'll top it off with white to get that highlight. And then same goes for the background, but working back to front, you're going to start with your lightest colors in the farthest part of the background and work your way to the foreground, which will be the darkest spots. For our fog today, I am going to be going in with the Arteza and the Winsor & Newton gouache. I love this, it is so opaque, but you can also make it very transparent if you water it down enough. And this is what is going to build all of our little clouds that are going to pop in through the back, middle, and foreground. And as for our deer, all I'm going to do is take a burnt umber, a touch of black, not much, and I am going to fill in the outline. I think I only did one layer for this. You won't have to do much more. Later in I go in with a little bit of colored pencil, watercolor pencil, to just touch up some of the brown areas. We don't want any detail on him because it's going to be completely washed with our light beam and our fog. For those vines, same thing, just going with blues and greens, making a mixture. Gonna do a little curly cues, make some fun little foliage to play around with in the trees. There's our light beam. All I did was take gouache and a flat brush here, and I didn't make it too thick because we don't want to overwash it, but we also don't want it too light, but you'd rather start light and then go to dark because you can redo it and rebuild. But when you do this, make sure that your deer, like the paint on the deer, is fully dry. Otherwise you're going to take that brown and you're going to wash it with the brush stroke and it's going to smear and you're not going to want that. Did some white splats in there too to show any dust particles, bugs, leaves, anything that would be floating around in the area to just make it stand out a little bit more. Our little magical splats of fun. And now I'm just going to go back and forth between building up my foliage layers with dark and light hues, more saturation with the greens, the blues, getting a lot of variety in those tones to create realism and depth through a very loose style watercolor. And again, after that layer dries, we're going to just touch up a bit more with our gouache, with that light gray. We really want it to pop, going to come in with a second beam so it doesn't look so isolated, and then just bringing that fog forward from the background, bringing it into the fore and middle ground. And of course, we can't just have trees and bushes, so we're going to throw in some rocks. So for this, I'm not actually using any gray. I'm using indigo. It's like a blue-gray mix, and then from there, I'm mixing that with a bit of gouache to get that blue-gray hue, and then I'm going over that with green so I can start to build moss up on those rocks. And for the moss on the trees, I'm going in with the gouache here because it is opaque and it builds over those browns very nicely, but that's why we wanted that green and blue undertone in the beginning, right? So I'm going to go in with the darks first, a few middle tones. We're going to let that dry, and then I'm going to take actually a sage green and mix that with just a little bit of either white gouache or yellow gouache to start building in those highlights. Right now I'm just blotting it in, but then also, as you see me doing here now, I'm going to do splats. And I'm going to do splats in all of those colors, working my way up again from dark, middle tones, and then our highlights. And the other media we will be using today are those watercolored pencils. I am using the Faber-Castell Aquaver watercolor pencils. I love them so much because with these, you can blend if you want to, and I think I do for one layer in here after I build them up in the trees, but you don't have to. You can just use them like you would a colored pencil, and they work great. We have a little bit of a pit marker in there to fit in some extra little white highlights. Also by Faber-Castell, it is a fine tip white pit marker. And one thing that I would like to note is that I did not wet my paper at all before going in on this. You do not need to wet your paper before doing a watercolor painting. Actually, with this, it's not as much water as you would think it is. You use a lot more water to clean your brushes than you actually put on your paper. You want your pigment to be fairly thick on your brush with the water, so it's not so viscous that it's like an acrylic, but not so oversaturated with water that it just bleeds everywhere and you can't get any fine details. So you gotta find a healthy medium, and you can play around with this before you go in until you feel comfortable with it. And it's the same idea with gouache. Yes, it is a thicker paint, but the more you thin it with water, the closer it gets to a watercolor. This is the Winsor & Newton 45 half pan set, and that is still to this day one of my favorite watercolor pans because I can layer all of these mediums together. It doesn't matter what order I use them in, they all blend beautifully together. If you want to get translucent effects, go for that. You can do glazes and build those up to get a bunch of different tones and hues. If you need something thicker and you need an immediate color right away, go for the gouache. And if you just want to build some fine details, watercolor pencils all the way. Here I am just going in with some more splats. I'm going to build some more bushes, build up that foliage all around the trees, make it look like there's a ton of leaves and moss and flowers and a bunch of stuff going on, but I'm just splatting a paintbrush with a bunch of different colors, again, working my way up from dark to light, and I'm going to do the same for the bushes. Wrapping around with that fog some more with the gouache. Now our focal point bush in the back, because this is where our sunbeam is coming through, it's a little bit clear here, so the fog is coming around the deer and that bush. So the idea is that this is going to be a little bit more focused. We're going to see a little bit more detail than we are to the bush across from it. This is going to be where our eye catches the most, is because of the vibrancy and the detail, and then it'll complement our deer that is in the center of the piece. Go in, add some more gouache to those trees just to bring out that moss, that green color a bit, and then re-darken it with my pencils, some blacks, some really deep sepia browns, also some dark umbers. And I'm not doing a lot for detail, I'm just drawing in random lines in the way that the wood grain would go with the branch, just etching it in. I'm not even blending, I'm not doing any detail, I'm not shading it. I'm letting it naturally kind of take place with the gouache and how I put the line. So if I see a green line, then maybe I'm going to put a brown streak there, and if it's closer to a brown dark shadow, I'm going to put a black line there. And then for our vines, I just started with a light green, did an undertone dark green to create that contrast, and then a little bit of white here and there with that pit marker to create the highlight. Nothing crazy, a few curly cues around them. Also, same technique. Some of them I just did the one color. And now we're just touching up that background. In our background fog, we really want to have those soft blue greens coming through. We don't want the fog to completely wash out our distant trees or our distant bushes that we have in there. We want them to still be apparent. Some more detail on the rocks too, just building up our shadows, using a little bit more indigo, a touch of black with the watercolored pencil here and there to create little divots. And I'm going to do that with the black, the green to build the moss, and then also just touches of white either with the gouache or the pit marker to get our highlights. Before I forget to mention, this is a 12 by 16, 140 pound hot pressed watercolor paper by Arches. I absolutely love that brand, regardless if you are a beginner watercolor or an expert. It's worth the investment. Of course, if you've never painted watercolors before, definitely get something to practice on. However, the effects that you are going to get with this paper, a pure cotton paper compared to an actual paper made from trees, there's no pilling with this paper. There's no limit to how much you can layer, how much water this paper can take because it is cotton. So definitely worth it. And there you guys have it. This was painted in a day. I actually clocked it. It took me just a touch over 7 hours to complete this. You can paint this in a day, or if you'd like to break it up into 2, no problem. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you guys here again.